Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special conversation that we at Interstellar and our sister channel, StratNewsGlobal, have ex- exclusively organized for you. Now, in this conversation, there is no bigger topic today than the landing of the Chandrayaan 3 lander and the rover. And what a momentous mission it has been. And this particular mission is being said to be akin to or similar to the Pokhran moment. This is going to be really big. The impact, the psychological impact on our people, the moral booster that it is, not only to the commoners, but to a variety of innovators, scientists, technologists, all those who are dealing with the progress of India's economy. It's going to be a game changer mission. The high of going on the moon, landing on the moon successfully, when in the recent past some of the missions have not been able to do so, uh, you know, uh, really successfully. Nothing against them, or we are not deriding them, but this has been the nature of the beast. And today, to discuss this nature of the beast, uh, and to discuss the beast itself, we have with us two very eminent guests. Uh, they are Omkar Nikam and Aditya Ramnathan. You've seen their pictures on the thumbnail that we've shared with you. But to give you all a brief introduction about them, Omkar is a strategic affairs, defense, and emerging tech journalist based out of Strasbourg in France. He is right now in India for a personal trip, and we are very happy to have you with us, Omkar. Omkar, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Chaitanya, and glad to have this opportunity for the discussion.
Omkar runs a separate podcast channel, which is very well received across the world. It is called as Access Hub. And at Access Hub, he has been able to make inroads into the European strategic community, the American strategic community, and he himself being an Indian, he has great linkages with the Indian community as well. So, welcome, Omkar. And
Thank
our other guest is again a very dear friend of mine, Aditya Ramnathan. Aditya is an associate fellow with Takshashila Institution. It's a very prominent think tank in Bengaluru. I love their office. The office space is really terrific. Very well located. Right in the heart of the city. And Takshashila does some amazing postgraduate uh, uh, courses, uh, runs a lot of diploma courses, and these have takers not only among the young crowd but also with the mid-career executives who are always inquiring, at least with me, that they want to take their courses. And Aditya is looking into military tech. He's looking into emerging tech, of course, from the military side of things. And he has also been interested in space policy and space law related issues. So, welcome to the show. Welcome to this conversation, Aditya.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Chaitanya.
So, although three of us are right now somehow associated with some sort of journalism, but none of us are exactly journalists anymore. So, Omkar is a consultant, Aditya has become a think tanker, I've become a professor. But three of us, we have nothing to do with ISRO, we have nothing to do with this particular mission at least, but we have
yes,
everything to go with it. And when I say
yes,
that, uh, we are part of a community that is sort of creating a bulwark for the space program of our country and the way it interacts with international partners, be it in North America, Europe, Africa, East Asia. And three of us have been in some way or the other connected with the space program in this little way of ours. So again, today is a special day. I won't take much time. First things first.
yes.
What did you think? What was going on in your mind when the lander landed?
For me, it was I mean, it was a goosebumps, very frankly speaking, because no other nation has actually gone to that point, first of all. And living in Europe for past almost 7 years now, one good thing I saw, it's always like, when you go outside of a country, it's not only you are going, the country is going with you as well. I could feel that today when our lander successfully, landed on the South Pole, because a lot of my European friends from France, Poland, and other parts as well from Eastern Europe too, they were posting in our regional languages. Congratulations. So you see, it's not only a mission success; it's a cultural success as well. Like we are breaking the boundaries on several levels, and that's the beauty of space exploration, that it brings together the people. And I believe today our Prime Minister also gave this strong message that we are a human centric nation, and we will follow up this attitude in the space exploration as well. Like this is not a success only for India, this is a success for humanity, and I think that is very much important.
So, is it an Apollo moment for us?
I would say Apollo moment more was it was of course for humanity, but the ecosystem at that time was, I would say, much more competitive. Like yesterday only, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues, and uh, the whole point is the difference between the 1960s and now, the current age, is that we are not competing. The nations are not anymore competing with each other of whose satellite will be much better. We are competing in terms of making ourselves better. Like we are in a race to possibly use space technology effectively for our purposes. Like Australia and UAE started the space agency almost at the same time, I think in 2018, but none of them are competing with each other. Like Australia is looking at its space sector from a perspective of how it can develop its national economy, whereas UAE has other goals. They want to strengthen their international relations. That's the reason they launched Mars orbiter mission as well. So things are different now, I would say. It's definitely I would say the energy level is similar to, I would say, Apollo, but I think the dynamics are much more different according to at that time what it was.
Aditya, what about you? What went in your mind?
Well, I mean, so obviously nervousness and just being happy when it actually happened, feeling relief. It's great to have this sense of relief in the middle of the week, and I think it is a cultural moment because. At least anecdotally, from what I've heard, there are watch parties in apartments. I'm getting WhatsApp forwards trying to promote insurance policies using Chandrayaan, right? So, I mean, it's obviously some sort of cultural moment, and it's something that's perhaps worth analyzing at some stage. Uh,
Yeah.
I'd argue that in some ways it's better than an Apollo moment in the sense that Apollo, was a huge. It had a huge cultural impact globally, but it did not sustain public support in the United States for human presence on the moon, right? I mean, by the time the Apollo program wrapped up, nobody really cared. Uh, I think this is not satiating India's appetite for lunar exploration. It's whetting its appetite. And I think in that sense, at least, it's better.
Definitely.
So, is it a matter of investments? Because Apollo at that point in time was investing nearly 4% of the GDP. They had just undergone the Vietnam War, which had uh, really terrible ramifications domestically for Washington. There's nothing as such with us. We have not gone at war with anybody. Things are looking bright. Our economy is looking bright. Uh, are we going to have a slow release? Will it be like a slow drug release into the body, which will create lasting impact?
I mean, I don't know. Like it's hard to predict, but I will say that I think there are two ways in which India can further its lunar objectives. One is, continuing to do what it does. Obviously, India needs to get more ambitious. It needs to repeat this performance. At some point, India needs to do what Changi 5 did, which is bring back lunar samples to the Earth.
Yes.
And so I think those are India's next steps, and we should not hesitate to take however long it takes to do that, to get it right. But I think, because you have, for example, this ambitious Artemis program, and because you have a private sector out there, the task, I think, for Indian diplomacy is to see how we can take advantage of those opportunities. Uh, Sourcing in the space industry is typically very parochial. NASA's $25 billion budget, whatever it is, the parts of it that go to private vendors go to American vendors right now. And that's a matter of national policy. That sort of thing has to change, and we in India have to encourage that change. We have to say, look, we signed up on Artemis. Now let us, at least in trusted geographies, figure out ways to work with each other. And the reason I say this is because not because we should simply become part of the Artemis program, or because India should just be another member of it. We have our own independent lunar goals, but this is a great way to learn. It's a great way to get access to technology, and it's a great way to provide commercial services for which ISRO, as well as the private sector, can get paid for, right? So if you are serious about doing lunar exploration over a long period of time, when you're a developing country that has all sorts of competing objectives, it makes sense to try and figure out ways to defray those costs. And I think if we do that, it may be more than a slow crawl. It may be, something akin to uh, a marathon jog.
You mentioned about Artemis, and one of the first tweets that came out of the United States was the tweet from Department of State, where they said that they congratulated ISRO, they congratulated the Indian
Yes.
government for this great success, and they called us an Artemis partner. Now, this is the first major space
Yes.
achievement after becoming an Artemis partner, and somehow this particular success will be received in a way that uh, we will be taken, or we will be more uh, cordially invited into the group. We'll be cordially given stakes. Yet at the same time, you have our prime minister sitting in Johannesburg, stating that the BRICS should create a planetary exploration consortium. So, what sort of game are we playing here? We are in Artemis, but we are still proposing a BRICS consortium for planetary exploration. Omkar, your take.
I think that's the reason I love India's strategic diplomacy. I mean, have our hands on everywhere, without hurting sentiments, of course, of any country or any organization. Primarily, I would say we saw this, unfolding after the Ukraine war, where half of the world was divided into, the sides, but India was one of the nations. I would say Ukraine war. I mean, it's I would say I don't know whether it's right to say, but that war situation came in as India's opportunity to showcase itself on a global platform, that what India is capable of, rather than just being a partner of Russia. So we have a relations with Russia, which I think other countries in the West might consider them as an adversary. But at the same time, we developed even a stronger relation with the West after that war. And I believe that has somewhere, led to this kind of collaboration in Artemis as well. And I think if we see the similar situation playing out in even in the Middle East, where we of course do not recognize several other countries, but we do have a strategic defense collaborations with Israel as well, along with the other adversary groups that Israel considers. We even have stronger collaborations with them too. So I think this is going to carry forward again in the space exploration, and that's exactly what even Prime Minister mentioned. And I would like to quote Dr. S. Jaishankar in this. That once he mentioned at World Economic Forum, I think back in 2021, that if we side, on one side or other side, we are just going to, create wars. There won't be any peaceful cooperation for that. So we have to create a cooperation. I believe in space exploration, this is what we need. Unfortunately, I always give an example of India and US and Russia. These two nations, without any common interest, have been collaborating very effectively at the International Space Station. And International Space Station has brought a lot of good research, and I would say on a much more scientific level. It has benefited several industries, including the pharmacy and biological institutes. But unfortunately, after the war, that collaboration is no more. But we really need to bring on these collaborations, where no matter whatever the terrestrial conflict interests are, no matter what the geopolitical interests are, but for the sake of humanity, the space exploration can be a pathway for a sustainable scientific collaboration for the humanity. And I believe India can be a leader in this. It already is, I believe, from the incidents that I mentioned. But I'm hoping that it will become a much more stronger leader in the future.
Before I ask the same question to Adi, uh, I'll give a small tidbit. Just like the Russians and the Americans have enduring cooperation when it comes to International Space Station, a similar kind of cooperation exists between American National Science Foundation as well as the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Both of them collaborate when it comes to space, when it comes to astronomy in a
Yes.
really big way. Both the agencies, they're not space agencies as such, they are scientific agencies doing astronomy, but there is deep cooperation, despite the fact that there is a exclusion policy implemented by NASA, where NASA is not allowed to work with the Chinese space agency. Although a lot of science fiction shows Chinese and the Americans work together. Uh, Coming to you, Adi, are we hedging by doing such maneuvers?
Yeah, I mean, we are hedging in the sense that look, Indian space diplomacy is going to reflect India's broader diplomatic approach, right? So obviously, India will want to continue engagement, especially with Russia, but also with other developing countries. India's, potential for space cooperation with China might be limited at this point, but even there, I would be happy if the two countries do find whatever ways in which they can cooperate, even if symbolically. And I say this as someone with no illusions about the India-China relationship. Uh, Having said that, I will say, yes, I know countries can hedge and can be on both sides, and UAE is collaborating with China while also being an Artemis member, but India is not the UAE, and so I think there is inevitably a political signal when India signs the Artemis Accords. I mean, if you are Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, you're mostly thinking about your war with Ukraine, but when you hear this news, you do interpret it as a political signal. About where India is leaning, at least at the moment. So I think that is there. That's inescapable. So sometimes, so even though you like to be in all camps, you are going to tend one way or the other, depending on how your interests converge or diverge. That's going to happen. Uh, you know, uh, but I would like to see, in the future, if what we can do with the Russians. One of the problems with collaborating with the Russians right now is not necessarily about intent; it's about capability. We don't know if the Russians are going to be able to continue offering the sort of space cooperation that they were in the past, particularly because they're under sanctions and they have financial constraints.
So my next question would be that will Russia hedge when it comes to China and India between the two countries? Because what has
Yeah.
happened now is, if you
Yeah.
slightly comprehend a bit, what Prime Minister Modi has done is he has thrown a bait at the BRICS countries. China may not take that bait. What will happen is eventually Brazil, Russia would welcome that proposal, where India takes the lead when it comes to that planetary consortium. And once it establishes itself as the progenitor of this particular idea of creating a consortium, India places itself on the same position or the same pedestal like the Americans have done with the Artemis. The only difference here
Yeah.
is India is doing that with nearly technologically equal partners, whereas what the Americans did was they first tried to get maybe slightly lesser capable space partners for the Artemis, and then slowly it sort of convinced France. France was reluctant to join Artemis. Even today, there is a camp in France which is not very happy about joining Artemis because
Very true.
they complain about the loss of European autonomy.
Yes.
We have Omkar from France. So, Omkar, what do you hear? What do you hear in Strasbourg?
Yeah, I believe you're very right, actually. I won't hesitate to say the truth. A lot of my colleagues from the French space sector are not really happy with it. So I believe this is where I think France and India cross, paths, where the diplomacies of like France and India kind of, I would say, similar, much more strategic manner. It's not always like, okay, you're on the other side, so let's create a war out of it. I mean, I've seen like France, also taking a strategic advantage wherever they are. I mean, it was also one of the first countries to oppose the Iraq war uh, at that time. And opposing an ally like United States really needs a stronger stand. So I believe the French have always been, independent, regardless of whether they are in the European Union or in other partnerships. So the independent decision making is something that the French people at the moment they feel that they are lacking on a lot of level. I'm not talking about the other industrial verticals because, of course, I'm not expert in other industries, but I'm talking about the space industry. So I mean, with Artemis, that's what has happened. People are not having that much autonomy, as you said. But I believe things might change in future because the way France is trying to capture things, both from the defense and the space perspective, and it is initiating collaborations even with India in the defense sector. So we might see a much more independent stand coming out of France. I mean, an Artemis signing might have, possibly heated up the ground for the independent stand. So we might see much more independent collaborations out of France. And I believe this is what has been, in general, I would say on a smaller level, has been lacking a little bit in the European Union. In general, I would say the member states because there have been several gaps which need to be filled. But just because you're a member state, you need to take concern of other states as well. And I believe somewhere it creates a blockade. Of course, there is no excellent intergovernmental collaborations like European Space Agency, but of course it comes at some cost as well. And I believe this is one of the reasons why India has never been into alliance. I mean, I have been exhausted by telling people that India and Russia we have been like great partners, but there have been never a formal alliance like NATO. We never had that, and I don't even think so. We have been under like currently because of I think the Indo-Pacific and the current fluctuations that are going on with the Chinese relations. There might be a situation that come in the future that we might be pressured to enter an alliance, possibly even in the space sector. I'm speaking about.
Adi, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with completely with Omkar that it would take something catastrophic for India to consider becoming part of an alliance. Uh, as you know, there were quite a few people in India who were very upset after India signed the Artemis Accords.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, but I should say I was probably in a minority that didn't really have a problem with it, and it's broadly because I think that the upsides are modest, but the downsides are fairly negligible. So in that sense, when you do the cost benefit analysis, it's okay. I mean, so just to talk about the Artemis Accords, uh, essentially they're a set of non-binding guidelines that the Americans have developed on conduct on the moon, right? And if you basically become an Artemis Accords signatory, that helps you join the Artemis program, which is the lunar exploration program. Uh, and most of this is fairly consonant with existing international law, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. There are some bits in it which obviously very very understandably cause concern. I think there are points of concern, which is one is basically having what are effectively exclusion or non-interference zones, which means you can tell other countries, hey, I'm building something here, so don't come. I'm defining this radius as a place where you shouldn't come in. So that can essentially become like de facto national territory, which is actually prohibited by the Outer Space Treaty. Then there is the bit similarly about protecting heritage sites. Now, obviously, the Americans want to protect their Apollo 11, Apollo 17, Apollo 12 landing sites. But when you say you want to protect these heritage sites, it is effectively again like declaring national territory. The third is, of course, that it allows for resource extraction, and India is a signatory to something called the Moon Treaty from 1979. The Moon Treaty did not have any major signatories from the big space powers of that time, including Russia, China, and the US. So not many takers for it. There's some 22 signatories in total, and there's some concern in India about there being a clash between Artemis and the Moon Treaty, because the Moon Treaty says that anything you take from the moon is a common heritage of mankind. Now, of course, you can lawyer your way through this and say, no, actually, because I'm extracting this and creating wealth, it's for the benefit of all mankind, right? So, there's some wiggle room over there. But my point is, let's say you don't sign Artemis, you're not going to stop anybody from doing what they're going to do, right? If you're India. So what is the downside really for India? You might have some modest upsides from being able to participate in the Artemis program, being able to, get technological cooperation or, do commercial deals in ways that favor you. So there are some upsides, but very few downsides when you think about it in terms of Indian national interest. So I'm personally fine with India signing Artemis. I don't think it's there are any real downsides to it for India.
Yeah, as you said, Artemis is non-binding. It does not have any obligations on the signatory countries, and that is something that not only India but also the United Arab Emirates has sort of understood. Because the next time when the UAE goes to the moon, it will go with the Chinese, not with the
Yeah.
Americans.
Yes.
So that is one. Number two is France itself, as we just discussed. There is a sizable population there, which is not very much in favor of Artemis, despite being France being a NATO country, despite being a close military ally of the United States. And then we have India. Now coming to the east of the planet, Japan. Now, there is something interesting that has happened today. People may not have noticed. Since I come from Maharashtra, our Deputy Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis is in Japan for an official trip, which is also managed by the Japanese consulate in Mumbai. He's going around uh, visiting the Eastern JR facility, Japan East Railway facility. He's looking at the infrastructure projects. Japan is one of the biggest infrastructure investors in India. And apart from that, what a day for him to be in Tokyo when India is landing on the moon, and how serendipitous it is that the next lunar mission is with Japan. So, what
Yes.
do you think of India-Japan partnership? We have done everything. We have done
Yeah.
right from infrastructure to automobiles to electronics. Space is something that
Yeah.
has not occurred to the India-Japan bilateral. How do you see the future?
Well, I'd like to tell it from a very recent experience. I had some guests from Japan on the podcast, but mostly from a defense perspective, I would say. But in general, I think whatever strategies are applied in defense later on, it carries forward somewhere in space as well, due to, of course, the military and security aspect. So I believe Japan really wants to come out of that, American circle or sphere. I mean, not fully because they have been in agreement, several agreements with the United States, but they really want to, come out of that sphere and develop their own identity, and that's the reason they are looking towards India as one of the prominent partners. And that is one of the reason I think they were the first one who to actually encourage the quadrilateral security dialogue. And I think quadrilateral security dialogue is going to affect the way space and defense partnerships even work. I mean, because of that, India and Japan are going to, of course, develop a strong partnership. But there is a thing called as resilient supply chain initiative, which is primarily meant to counter the Chinese interference in the Indo-Pacific. And currently, it is considering, the defense supply chain as well. But down the line, they'll be considering the space supply chain as well. And currently, the way I think the Chinese trade imports and all these things that are affecting the Indo-Pacific, India might become one of the prominent players to develop strong relations with not only with Japan but even with Australia as well. So I believe this kind of external initiative, which are in the non-space segment, will be primarily uplifting the position of India and Japan together. And I think that might be, further helping creating, I would say, a chain reaction of partnerships between India and Japan.
Yeah, I think Omkar
Aditya,
has covered.
uh,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I'll just add to what Omkar has covered. Do you want to comment anything about the relation between the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative, the Critical Minerals Supply Chain Initiative, as well as the space sector, the space cooperation?
All right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not so much knowledgeable on the critical minerals side. But yeah, I had one guest from Center for Iron Power Studies from New Delhi, and she was very much hopeful to, in noting the points that we cannot, create a monopoly. Like currently in critical minerals, there is a monopoly from Chinese side, and this might, affect the way we operate in sectors like space and defense as well. So this monopoly shouldn't be there. There should be, kind of a segmentation of contribution, participation, and taking the advantage of the minerals that we are kind of mining. But that something has to be, eradicated. Like people generally misunderstand when it comes to, countering Chinese, but it's mainly about, uh, cooling down the Chinese aggression. I would say, you cannot create or claim everything yours, right? You need to, share and then grow with each other. You cannot even deploy strategies like, okay, let's loan out something and then pile up things and capture, the islands. So I believe the critical minerals perspectives is more about, kind of reducing the monopoly that China is trying to create, rather than, kind of, reducing or like shutting down the Chinese collaborations. So that perspective is something that we also need to possibly bring into the space industry too, when it comes to, minerals collaboration, because I believe the system that even from which we are speaking at the moment, it has a critical minerals in it. So that's how it is important, and that's the reason, like just imagine if one company is creating a monopoly about some product, they might create a havoc of prices later on in the, once they, have a sizable customer. And I believe I would like to, just extend a little bit. This is something that I worry as well about what SpaceX has been doing. So SpaceX is currently one of the, I would say, top launch service provider. Of course, India's PSLV has more than 95% success rate. But I believe this ongoing pathway where SpaceX is the only one, possibly, along with, of course, India is there. But in terms of heavy launch capabilities, SpaceX is the only one. So I believe there should be some other companies, should come into the play. But unfortunately, I believe launch vehicle is one of the costliest business. The return on investment is, I would say, much more lesser, but the risk involved are much more higher as well. But I'm hopeful that some companies, come up in this domain and might become, much more kind of competitive, because we don't really need only one player dominating the segment.
Hari, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Omkar has covered most of it. I'll just add a couple of things. We talk a lot about quad space cooperation, but I think our cooperation with the US is quite different from our cooperation with Japan and Australia. And I think we should, think of those also separately. Uh,
Hmm.
a few things about so Japan. So one is, outside of our space circles, Japan is perhaps the most underrated space power in India. People don't think of Japan as a space power, but it has
Yeah.
fantastic technology and experience, and it's a great collaborator for India. The second point is, much as we do, for example, with supply chains, maritime cooperation, and so on, we should think of pooling resources on space situational awareness, space domain awareness with them. We should even perhaps consider, building, launching, maintaining satellite constellations for specific purposes, especially around maritime domain awareness. Uh, the final point is, it makes sense for these kind of countries like Japan, Australia, and India to pool resources, especially when they're thinking about doing deep space exploration, because it's expensive. You want to defray costs, or sometimes all of you have the same interest, so there's no point in reinventing the wheel. The other thing is, because these countries are geographically dispersed, we don't think of this, but for space monitoring, that's great, right? Because you can have space monitoring stations at all these different geographies. So I think there's a strong case for it, and I would be surprised if it doesn't happen.
It's an emotional evening for all of us. Euphoria,
Yes.
uh, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of dopamine, and then a lot of starry-eyed dreams. So we have another half an hour to go, uh, and in this next half an hour, we'll take a lot of questions from our audience who have joined us on YouTube. Thank you for joining us in large numbers. So late, we've never done a show this late, at least on Interstellar, and even on Strat News Global. This is the latest that we've done shows. Having said that, let's talk about the future. What's the road ahead after Chandrayaan 3? You know, these 14 days will pass by very swiftly. The results will come in.
Yeah.
What next for us? What are we trying to do? How high should we ambition?
Aditya, would you like to start?
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. I have my view of this is that if there are two broad there's one long term aspect to space exploration and the short term. The long term is building your capabilities for the distant future when you're thinking generations ahead, and connected to that is building national morale. Some of us who are in academia or think tanks, we tend to discount this, but if you're a politician, you understand it very well. National morale is something, and that's a big part of their decision making, so that's there. But the shorter term uh, payoffs that we need to look for are the ones that, is this a way that in which you can invest in Indian capabilities? So, you know if you have people in ISRO, for example, who are doing a lot of lunar exploration, does that increase relevant scientific and engineering talent, project management talent, that can eventually go into the private sector and build wealth over there? To me, that is the big one. Is this a great way for government to engage in a little bit of Keynesian economics and get massive returns over a 10 or 15 year period? And so long as that is possible, and so long as we can figure out how to do that, whether by ourselves or in collaboration with others, I think that is the way that India needs to focus on lunar exploration. Because we can, again, like you said, we're all very elated today, but not just with India. Look, space exploration can come in waves. Enthusiasm builds for some time, then it goes away. Uh, we are very excited about the private sector in space, but look, private sector in space will go through boom and bust cycles like private sector everywhere else, right? So you need some patience over here, and you need to think of basically creating payoffs for India over a 10-15 year period that creates jobs, that creates wealth, that creates IP in India, that India can use and leverage. It has, space power has to be part of gross national power. Otherwise it's not of much use, and it's not going to get sustained. Like the Apollo program, like a lot of these things that just went nowhere. The Soviet Union sent probes to Venus. Great. Nothing's happened after that, right? So we need to figure out how to make this sustainable for India. And I think that's how we exactly do that is a question that I'm still thinking about, and hopefully we'll be able to provide something on in the future. But that's the guiding principle.
We spoke about supply chains. We spoke about critical minerals. Uh, we haven't spoken about our ecosystems yet. Space ecosystems in India. So you have the Bangalore ecosystem around the ISRO centers, as well as the defense DRDO and HAL centers. Then you have an ecosystem in Hyderabad, Chennai, here in Pune, up north in Ahmedabad, and then further north, maybe around Delhi, around the DRDO circles, as well as in Chandigarh. Apart from Bangalore and Hyderabad, none of the other ecosystems have, sort of garnered that name and fame or attention. Uh, and that is something that we'll have to work on. How long can we depend on these two crowded ecosystems? Uh, are we looking towards developing newer innovation ecosystems when it comes to space? Let's say Mumbai, Pune, or Ahmedabad, Gandhinagar, and especially when we are developing a lot of public infrastructure. You have the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which is a $1 trillion project where we are building the Bharat Mala, the Sagar Mala. We are building uh, the the high-speed rail network, you know, basing talent in tier two cities that we call them would become eventually very easy. And how do we play around that? How do we play around the smart city concept, the 100 smart cities? What will these smart cities really cultivate? At the end of the day, if they are able to cultivate space technology or information technology or anything digital, that will be of great value to the national economy. What are your thoughts on that? These are, slightly absurd facets, uh, abstract facets. We don't think of them in one light. Uh, I'm right now convincing you all to think on those lines. So, Omkar?
Yeah, I would like to a little bit, I'll take a step back. And, thing is like before being a space and defense expert, I'm firstly an astrophotographer. I started my career during my bachelor's as an astrophotographer from Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics in Pune. So, somewhere, when you do an astrophotography, it's an art, I would say. I won't call astrophotography as a science. I would call it as an art, So somewhere my mind actually always goes back to the basics whenever I look to the space industry in a much more commercial manner. So I believe what we really need to change is the way the world is perceiving ISRO. I mean, European Space Agency has achieved some amazing feats with Rosetta. But if you really ask in a rural India, what is NASA and what is ESA, they will be able to tell you about NASA, even they don't know the full form of it, but they won't be able to recognize what is European Space Agency. So this is a narrative building, I would say, that boils down to, and India really needs to set that narrative right. Starting from the cultural influences, that's exactly was what I told in the opening conversation. One of the key reason I was so happy today is because people were posting the foreign people who don't really know what is the language Marathi, Tamil, Hindi, Telugu. They were posting in our regional languages. Congratulations, like Badai ho, Abhinandan, you know, and this is something a cultural influence that is going off as well with it, and India really needs to actually do that. That's how the root level narrative will change. That's how things will initiate, and I believe somewhere our institutions, both in space and defense, need to become much more open when it comes to setting the narrative, because narrative building is something that can be done through the medium of films, through the medium of dramas, podcast as well, but something that is entertaining to consume, because to watch a film you don't need a degree. I mean, a person who doesn't really know anything and goes and watches Interstellar will come out either with a love of filmmaking or either with a love of physics. So I believe India really needs to open up those gateways, the Indian institutions, very frankly speaking, to the creative world. And creative world in the sense I'm talking the India's creative artist. So, our film industries, our other creative artists really need to actually speak with the institutions and then, try to create the content based on that, because these mediums are, somewhere a mass can be influenced at, at a very short span of time, I would say. Like, for example, the way NASA has been portrayed and the way US military has been portrayed everywhere, uh, we don't really see that happening in Europe. I mean, the French forces have been doing some amazing jobs, in terms of technology, especially. But in Europe also, I see the same thing. I think Europe and India are on the same level when it comes to, building the narrative. Both, I mean, the European nations and India really need to work on building the narrative, because I think this is something that will change. For example, if some films come out based on what can be done possibly in Chhattisgarh, because there has been a lot of mining, people have been displaced about it. So if something, a documentary comes out, how Earth observation applications can be used, satellite-based Earth observation applications can be used. I'm pretty sure if after youngsters, after watching those things, might be influenced, either to pursue it as a career as an engineer, or to become a documentary filmmaker on that specific subject. but in one way or the other, the masses will be changed. And I think the creative platforms are always the best to possibly change the mass, than utilizing science and technology. Science and technology should be used as a complement for the creative arts.
Fantastic, fantastic. Adi, your take on that?
Hey, yeah. So firstly, just I want to really second what Omkar said about creative arts. Uh, Anybody you talk to who's in the space field will tell you, most of them will tell you they got into it because they read some science fiction book, and
Yeah.
then they're doing this for life. Okay, so
Yeah,
it's absolutely important. And the thing is, we don't have enough good Indian science fiction connected to space, to
Yes.
fire up the imagination. Whatever the Vikram lander does, whatever Pragyan rover does, I think one of the most important things they will do is fire up the imagination of young people in this country. At least some people will take up space exploration and space sciences as a field of study, and that will serve India well. Uh, to your broader point about how do you bring this to other Indian cities, I'm not so sure that it's that easy. If you look at how hubs develop in other industries, for example, in the IT industry, uh, it's not necessarily all that, it's not planned. Much of this happens organically, and now once it happens organically, governments, union governments, state governments can create incentives to build on that. But who imagined 100 years back that the city I'm in, Bangalore, would be this tech city, right? I mean, this didn't happen because of anything that the state government did or the state central government did, union government did. No, none of them, right? So some of these things just happen by themselves. And I tried some time back to look at India's private defense industry, and where what sort of companies were based. And not surprisingly, if you look at where the hubs develop and what sort of hubs develop, they they reflect other commercial industry, right? So you have a lot of electronics, IT, sensors companies based in Bangalore and Hyderabad, a little bits in Chennai. You have a lot of land vehicles in Chennai, Avadi area. You have another hub of land vehicles in Mumbai, Pune, Nashik area. You have, companies that make things like ballistic vests and helmets and all that in the, Kanpur to Lucknow belt, where there's a lot of work on fabrics and shoes and all of that, right? So these things just develop by themselves. Now, after that, for example, a government can say, we'll set up defense industrial corridors in UP and Tamil Nadu. But they're setting those up in places where that infrastructure, where that ecosystem already partly exists, and you're building on that. Uh, so I am not so sure that we can so easily just spread, India's space ecosystem around the country. Yes, I mean, the fact that you have SAC in Gujarat, means that you'll have some kind of hub there, definitely. I think we should maybe also think in terms of comparative advantages, right? So each part of India might, like with that defense industry I mentioned, bring its specific strengths, right? So maybe Mumbai, Pune will offer in the future finance and insurance and so on to the space industry. Maybe that's its strength. So I think a lot of this will happen organically, and what governments have to do then is identify what those strengths are and build on them, right? So let me tell you an example of things that I think state governments in India should be doing a lot more, right? State governments should not wait for the union government. They should, for example, try and create regulatory sandboxes. They should try and create, pool testing facilities and so on. Some states like Telangana have tried that, right? And that might work. Uh, but here's the thing: if Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka do the exact same space reforms, these state governments, the bang for the buck for Karnataka is just going to be much more. So long as it doesn't mind focusing on this Bangalore hub than Madhya Pradesh, right? So it's very difficult to compete like that. I think a lot of this just happens organically. What we need to do is identify where comparative strengths and advantages come up in different parts of the country and foster that, and also, of course, encourage Indians to migrate.
fantastic. The reason why I asked this question was because number one, while we were watching the television throughout the past 2 or 3 days, the one thing that prominently came to the fore was the young kids that are from tier two cities,
Yes.
from the villages. What
Yeah.
happens to their aspirations? Do they have to migrate from their nice, cozy towns and villages to big cities to enjoy the grind as we all did? Or can we take their career aspirations to their cities? That is number one. Number two is various state governments have come up with space policies of some kind, or policies of some other sectors that can be extrapolated to the space sector. Like for instance, there are digital policies, state government policies. Then you have electronics policies that have been initiated by state on their own volition. So these could be extended eventually into the space domain easily. Uh, as you rightly put, and I agree with that, that there are certain advantages that certain cities and regions will always enjoy because of the geography or because of the inherent strength of the population. But then, as you also mentioned, Omkar, it is not just about science and tech. It is also about the arts. It is also about the financing. Are we looking at a renaissance in India's space program, where sectors like the creative fields or sectors like banking and finance, which had no space because it was all done top down from the government to the agencies. It was all within the confines of the walls. Has the opening up created any renaissance? Are we looking up to it?
I think it might happen in future, and I think this is somewhere I would like to actually stress more on. The Indian institutions should be, possibly become much more open, like accessible. Like I being an Indian citizen, I'm finding it very much hard to actually bring someone on the podcast from ISRO or from any other think tank, I would say.
I'm with you.
Yeah. Thank you. So, but I had recently a guest from US Air Force think tank, director of one of the centers, and it was very much, I mean, easy. Of course, it was not easy to bring that topic specific for the conversation, but it was easy and approachable. And this is where I think the institution should become much more open, not only to civilians, but even to the artist. Like for example, if someone is making a film, to genuinely integrate those elements, like we cannot always talk that okay, some Hindi films or some Tamil films are not really integrating the space elements well. But unfortunately, if the Indian institutions are not giving access to the filmmakers in a genuine way, uh,
Hmm.
how they will be able to integrate the elements, right? I mean, the US armed forces don't really give a real guns to the Hollywood, but they serve sometimes, as a creative factor when it comes to, consulting. Like I have one of my friend who is working in Caltech, and her partner is actually a creative consultant for several films, for Marvel and other films that come out of the studios. So these are the kind of things I would expect, going down the line. A person from maybe Indian Institute of Astrophysics consulting on a film which is being made something on a similar level like Interstellar or maybe much more interesting. So I think these pathways should be open, and this actually brings people closer because films and the other creative contents are a medium to bring the layman knowledge to the mature level. A person really doesn't, when you look at space, we are a part of it. We don't really need to have a degrees, maybe masters or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
PhD to
Absolutely,
understand it. Because I was working
absolutely.
at IUCA in Pune, and I have seen some of the best telescope experts who have been just 12th pass, and they currently actually take workshops at ISC Bangalore, Indian Institute of Astrophysics. So it's all about the love for science and the creative arts. So I
Hmm.
think in this way, I think the Indian institutions should become much more, both in space and defense, should become much more open to impart knowledge to both on a domestic level first. I wouldn't take a leap of faith for the international directly, but at least for the Indian citizens who are trying to make the content in India for the Indian people, the institution should be accessible to them. So that's my point actually.
Yeah. Aditya, your take on this?
Yeah, very quickly. So, I didn't think that when I started this day, I'd mentioned the movie Top Gun. But yes, the movie Top Gun in 1986, the US Navy collaborated with American filmmakers. And essentially, whatever you think of that movie, it's a great propaganda film. Uh,
Yeah.
and same with
Yeah.
this. its legacy sequel from last year. I mean, I
Yes,
love the legacy sequel, but it's a fantastic work of propaganda, and
yes,
it's possible because uh, you know in both those cases the U.S. Navy collaborated with the filmmakers and actually gave the filmmakers a lot of creative leeway, right? They didn't
Yeah.
supervise every little bit of the script. They said, yeah, okay, have fun. So I think, if you want, for example, to increase popular support and perhaps even budgetary support for the Gaganyaan program, it makes sense, uh,
Yeah.
to open that up to the creative industries and fire up people's imaginations. You can maybe start with documentaries, but you can move on to narrative fiction filmmaking. I mean, I think that's to me, it's common sense. The other point is, I've learned over the last few years so much from Indian space scientists and engineers. They've shared their information, their knowledge with me, their understanding, and the only thing that I can give back to them is my understanding of the sector, as someone who comes from public policy and international relations, right? The thing is, I'm not able to do that with folks at ISRO, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I just hope that happens.
Absolutely, absolutely. And why just ISRO or Indian Institute of Astrophysics? You now have, the new universities that have come up. Faculties are populating these new universities, both private
yes,
as well as the new IITs or the central universities. You now have a university coming up in Ladakh. Fantastic. I mean, that's a location uh, that should be, leveraged in a way that the university should be world class. It should be a
yeah,
world leading university in the sense that you are situated in a location which is a cold desert, which is very similar to Mars, topography wise or terrain wise, if not climatically entirely. Uh, it is sitting on the third pole of the planet. And this is how you should come up and be more creative.
yes,
But something that is something that we must learn as we progress. And I think missions like Chandrayaan 2 will make us think creative and perhaps also convince the government that okay, it is the creative juices that will propel the country and not the mundane bureaucracy that we often come
yes.
across. Before closing, I'd like to invite questions from our audience. I think some of them have stuck around with us for more than an hour. And firstly, thanks a lot to them. And if there are any questions, can they be popped on the screen? I'm doing this for the very first time. Yes. Our friend from StratNewsGlobal, Amitabh Revi, is asking, was Russia in too much of a hurry in the race to the moon? And can you put Chandrayaan and the whole space program in perspective with respect to the money spent by other countries vis-a-vis India? Who wants to take it?
I'll take, you
I'm
can
not
go ahead.
qualified. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm also not much aware in this aspect, but I would like to just put it in this way that India has always done things in a very limited resources. Uh, but I don't see it as a race between India and Russia. I mean, it's a media narrative that came out from several, I mean, outlets. I think I saw CNN and I mean even the Sky News. I believe, speaking. I mean, when it comes to science and tech, I believe we should keep out the geopolitics a little bit of it because it's pure like collaboration. I mean, for a matter of fact, a lot of European space collaborations have been with the Russian companies. So I believe we should actually always keep out the geopolitics out of it. So I don't see it as a race, but I think Russia was also they were also trying to do the same thing what Israel was trying to do, land on the same part. But with respect to I mean finances, I would say India has always done things with a limited resource. Uh, but I'm not sure from an engineering point of view. I'm not sure the kind of quality it has because I think our first Mars orbiter mission was kind of I would say a trial. In that aspect, and we didn't really give preference for the quality. So I believe the quality has to be increased over the time as we proceed. Of course, it will increase because as soon as we have the results, we will get better with each mission. So even though I think today I saw some news that India's Chandrayaan 3 mission has cost less than what the interstellar film has. Down the line it might increase because our quality of components, our demands to capture what is going on. Today, we are possibly putting the rover to just analyze the mineral samples. Tomorrow, we might, do it for something else, to possibly erect some colonies on Moon. So, the expenses are going to increase. Tomorrow, we won't be able to say that, we have done it in remote resources because our demands are going to increase with that respect.
Just to quickly add to what Omkar said, and this man might not answer Amitabh's question. So I don't know what the Luna 25 cost, but I think that yes, absolutely, India's frugality is part of its competitive advantage and part of why we are able to have a space program like we do. But let's not get too complacent, because if you look at the Bereshit rover from 2019 as well as the Hakuto R, they're fairly cost competitive. Now, obviously, a lot of them cut corners. Bereshit rover failed, and they use untested technology, all of that, right? But don't let's not underestimate the ability of private sector to cut costs, and so that's something India should always be aware of.
Yeah, and
Yes.
more recently, we haven't heard a direct competition when it comes to cost pricing between SpaceX and ISRO, where SpaceX is definitely beating us, black and
Yeah.
Yeah.
with the competitive pricing. So yeah, for the interest of the audience, as Aditya just mentioned, Bereshit was an Israeli rover, and Hakuto,
Yes.
as the name goes, very apparent. It was a Japanese rover. Both of these tried to land on the moon, but perhaps this time ISRO was more careful when it came to redundancies that were inserted, redundancies in the form of various communication antennas, in the form of various cameras, 14 antennas, 11 cameras. You've never had that sort of a mission uh,
Yes.
made by any of the Indian engineers. Uh, can we have a next question, please, on the screen, if there is any? Yes, Amitabh is again at it. What's the extent of India's cooperation with France, especially on Gaganyaan?
I'm actually unaware about it, so I cannot really answer on it
I,
because
I I can answer that.
yeah, you can answer that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can answer that, Amitabh. So the fact is, when we announced the mission, this was in 2018. Uh, and that was 15th of August. Like every time, our prime ministers love to announce space mission on the Independence Day from the ramparts of the Red Fort. So when it was announced, immediately within a month, uh, ISRO had organized along with CII the Space Expo back then, and the French were uh, a large delegation that had attended, and if I remember correctly, they were also the chief guest. The French Space Agency were the chief guest for that event, for the Space Expo. And it was then that the French Space Agency head, Legault, he announced that France will partner on Gaganyaan, that they'll provide full assistance when it comes to space medicine. Now, the city of Toulouse in southwest of France is supposed to be a major aerospace hub because you have major aircraft facilities there. Uh, there is a major uh, hangar in Toulouse that builds components for the European Ariane launcher. At the same time, Toulouse is also a hub for medical sciences. So that is how, as we were just talking about an ecosystem, Toulouse is also a aerospace and medicine ecosystem, and they have clubbed together to create, space medicine competencies. This is something that we have been lacking. Uh, there is
Yes.
something known as Institute of Aerospace Medicine, which is based out of Yelhanka, if I correctly remember.
Yeah.
And that used to be the aerospace medicine institution for India for a very long time. But it didn't have the complete competencies because we were only looking at medicine for the aerospace applications, which is suborbital applications. In the case of Gaganyaan, we need competencies that would take us into the orbit, make our astronauts stay there for a few hours or a few days, and then bring them back. So that not only included good care about their health, but good care about the selection of astronauts. This is something that Toulouse has expertise in. Space food, the MRE food, which is very important because what would they eat? Uh,
Yes.
design and development of the astronaut suits. Now, these are things that India has never explored earlier because we were only limiting ourselves to the bread and butter satellite and rocket industry. This is something that is occurring to us, fairly recently, and perhaps a lot of learning from the Gaganyaan, a lot of learning from Chandrayaan will go into taking Indian Vyomanauts, if I may call them so, to the moon whenever they plan to go there. Any other question? Vidya has a question. Shouldn't be a problem for India to open a line of political communication with the Artemis? It's non-binding, and we've proven capability to stand alone if the need arises. Adi, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. So, Vidya, as you know, Artemis is just a series of non-binding principles that India has signed on to in June. So that's the accords, and then there's the program. The program is a lunar exploration program, which is American-led but is multinational and involves a lot of private sector companies and so on. For what I'm still not sure about is whether India is going to become a major Artemis program partner. It has signed on to the accords. Uh, Now, becoming an Artemis program partner does not in any way prevent India from doing its own missions, right? And my argument is, if we want to become a partner in Artemis, we should use that, in fact, to strengthen our own lunar ambitions, right? We should use that to defray costs. We should use that to access technology, gain experience, those sort of things. So unless we do that, Artemis doesn't really have a lot of upsides for us.
I have a supplementary question on that. If India is too hard-headed when it comes to Artemis, if we appear um, too ambitious for American taste, uh, will the doors remain open for us?
Nah, we don't know. I have no idea.
We don't know.
And if the doors close, they close, right? I mean,
They
so,
close.
so I mean that's the point. So we're just back to where we started, right?
Yeah,
Okay, okay. Because this is not an India that the US is accustomed to.
Yeah,
exactly.
but I will say that the
Yeah,
US, I mean, just because going to the moon is so hard and so expensive, uh, it would not be wise of the US to just close the door on India, right? So I mean, yes,
Yeah,
they might
yeah.
not want to share some technology,
yeah,
but I mean, look, they're going to the European Union for that European large logistics lander, things like that, right? They're getting the
Mm.
Japanese to collaborate on their lunar gateway, so they are really trying to get these countries and space agencies to cooperate big things. And I mean, if I was American, I think it would make sense to get the Indians to do something similar. Now, if the Americans don't want to, it's fine. We're back to where we are now. We're back to where we were in May.
Okay, okay. Amitabh is thanking us for the wide-ranging and comprehensive discussion. Thank you, Amitabh. So, with that, we come to the end of this very exciting discussion. Uh, I'd like to thank Omkar and Aditya for coming to the show. We've never done this kind of a show on Interstellar or on Strat News Global. So, thank you for being a sport. Choosing this day was actually the wisest thing that we could have done
yeah.
to test whether we have audience late in the night. Uh, I don't want to make it a movers and shakers like show which Shekhar Suman used to run once upon a time, but but this is
Yes,
something. This is a genre. Or this is a time slot that can be explored for these really interesting prevailing
yes,
discussions on space. Uh, and we spoke about creativity. We spoke about the aspirations of rural India, semi-urban India. Space is going to infect all of us in a good way.
yes,
And the next set of missions that we take to the moon or to Mars or into deep space, mind you, Prime Minister Modi mentioned about deep space uh, in his address to the nation just immediately after the landing. So, uh, India is getting ambitious, and perhaps once we breach the $5 trillion economy mark, although we might have already breached it, who knows? There hasn't been a economic census done yet. So perhaps that would give us more boost. to start investing in the space sector in a more wise
Yes.
manner or in a more strategic manner. So, with that, thank you all for joining us, and do like this program, like this particular video. Share our channel, all the channels, Bharat Shakti, StratNews Global, as well as Interstellar, and subscribe to all of them. Subscribe to Takshashila's fabulous courses that they organize for early career and mid career students.
Yes.
We are all students for life. So please visit their website, Takshashila Institution. And with Omkar does some fantastic podcast on Access Hub. Uh, you get to meet some of the most eclectic intellectuals and practitioners on his podcast. So thank you all once again, and hope to meet you all very soon.
Thank you very much, Chaitanya. Thank